Hello, everyone. I'm Surya Ramchandran. I'm a naturalist who has worked in central India and Ladakh and spent a lot of time exploring the Western Ghats. And I'm quite excited to be talking about the reptiles of the Western Ghats to you all. We actually had a recent publication on the Western Ghats and other parts of South India. And a lot of the information I've used in that, I've tried to put together over here in a very simple and easy to understand manner. So, without further ado, let's get right to it. So, when you think of the Western Ghats, the first reptile that comes to anyone's mind, of course, is the king cobra, Ophiophagus hana, one of the most stunning, charismatic reptiles among all the reptiles in the world. And we will talk a little bit about the king cobra soon, but I'd like to introduce the reptiles of the Western Ghats in a much broader perspective. And there are over 300 different species of reptiles recorded in the Western Ghats. So the king cobra might be large, charismatic, and it might be the larger than life reptile species of the Western Ghats. But there are many, many beautiful hidden species in the mountain peaks, the valleys, the laterite plateaus, and all the other mix of habitats that the Western Ghats has to offer. In fact, look at this shield tail here. It's the Keres black shield tail. It is found in Goa and northern Western Ghats, and it's just absolutely beautiful the way it shines. And there are many such things which may not be as large or as well known as the king cobra, but that does not make them any less. And we're going to try to jump into the world of reptiles right from here. So before we start talking entirely about reptiles, let's just understand a little bit more about the Western Ghats and why it is able to support 300 or more species of reptiles. So what you see here is a habitats map of the Western Ghats. So this stretch of dark green is the Western Ghats, and as you can see in the legend, the southern Western Ghats montane rainforest is what we are talking about till here, and then they have the northern Western Ghats montane rainforest from here onwards. And then on the windward side and the leeward side. So I'd like to explain what these are. The windward side is where the southwest monsoon hits the Western Ghats, and the leeward side is generally drier because it is on the rain shadow of the Western Ghats. So this is pretty much what you need to know at the start. The Western Ghats, how it goes along the west coast of the peninsula of India. It has high peaks with montane rainforests, and to the west in the windward slopes is the moist forest, and to the east of it usually is slightly drier forests. So this is the Western Ghats in a nutshell. Um, Diving a little deeper into the Western Ghat geology and rainfall, here I've just taken a small excerpt of southern Western Ghats. This is the Nilgiri Hills to the north, and of course the Shambhu Hills and the Cardamom Hills, which come under the Kanyakumari district of southern Western Ghats. But what is interesting to note is the Palghat Gap and the Shengota Gap. So this is a spelling mistake. It's actually Shengota, Shencottah gap. So what is interesting about these gaps is they are basically 100 or 50 kilometers of 100 kilometers of plains, which actually separate the Western Ghats into different mountain ranges. So for certain species of reptiles which are found in, let's say, for example, the Nilgiri Hills, because of the Palaghat Gap, they may not be found in the Anamalai or the Palni Hills. And those that are found in this area may not have been able to cross over to the Cardamom Hills because of the Shengota Gap. So these kind of gaps actually act as very interesting and very large species barriers, which most of the reptile species find it hard to cross. And at the same time, if you look at the rainfall, you can actually see that the highest rainfall is somewhere in the southern Western Ghats because they get both the highest intensity of the southwest monsoons and also a lot of the northeast returning monsoons. So both of them hit the southern tip of the Western Ghats. And that is probably one of the highest biodiversity areas, even in the Western Ghats. If we consider the Western Ghats to be a biodiversity hotspot, the southern Western Ghats is definitely right amongst the top smaller pockets of the Western Ghats. So you can see here that the rainfall is quite high in the western sides of the Western Ghats. And as you go towards the east, you can see that the rainfall kind of reduces in its intensity. That is because this is the rain shadow. So keeping these things in mind, basically keeping factors like variations in altitude, rainfall, and also the geological features we spoke about, we can actually classify the Western Ghats into multiple habitats. So here we have the bamboo and scrub forest, which, as you can guess, is in the leeward slopes of the Western Ghats. The riverine habitats, basically all the rivers that originate in the Western Ghats as they go through the slopes and towards the foothills, they form interesting habitat niches. Along the western foothills of the Western Ghats, you have something called Myristica swamps, which are a very unique habitat type which are found in the Western Ghats. Basically, these are swamps which are permanently moist and there's always some water. And these protruding roots are one of the key characters of these swamps. And of course, you have the high altitude grasslands and shola forests, because as you go higher in the Western Ghats, let's say around 1,500 meters and above, the winds are so high and there are mostly stunted trees forming shola forests, and there are large swaths of grasslands. And these grasslands actually act like the sponges for the rainfall and lead to the origin of a lot of big rivers that we see in South India. An interesting other feature of the Western Ghats are these laterite plateaus. So all of you know that a plateau is basically a flat topped elevated area. So as you can see here, these laterite plateaus are basically rocky plateaus which are found amongst the Western Ghats. And the soil here is very thin. And because of their unique structure, they have led to a little bit of endemism, which is basically some species that are found just there or have adapted to this thin soil, flat terrain, which is not really there elsewhere in the Western Ghats. So, laterite plateaus, bamboo scrub, riverine habitats, myristica swamps, shola forests, and mountain grasslands are just some of the many habitat types that one can encounter in the Western Ghats. But this will give us a good basis before we start talking about the Western Ghats. So, what we are going to do kind of tackle these 300 species of reptiles, which is not going to be possible in one session, I'm going to try to go from the leeward slopes, that is the eastern slopes of the Western Ghats, from the drier areas, climb the mountains to the high peaks, and then descend down to the moist western sides. So when we do that, you'll have an idea of the species composition, the adaptations, the gradation, and how different things are found in different parts of the Western Ghats. So keeping that in mind, let's start with the leeward slopes. But before that, there is one interesting thing that you need to know. So we spoke about these broad habitat classifications of the Western Ghats, but even something like a coffee plantation or a tea plantation or just a stream that's flowing at the edge of a village or a town in the Western Ghats is a habitat by itself and could support species that are not found anywhere else. So that is how interesting habitats are when you're looking for reptiles. When you're looking for big animals, you don't look at these things. But when you're looking at smaller things like reptiles, which are so well adapted to different niches, we need to start looking at every single possibility in every single corner. And every available bit of space is a potential habitat. So, based on how reptiles are found, we spoke about the gaps, we spoke about the variations in habitat. Based on how reptiles occur in the Western Ghats, I've classified them as widespread reptiles, like the Bedome's keelback, which is found throughout the Western Ghats. Reptiles restricted to certain habitats. The Whitaker's sand boa is a kind of constrictor which is found only in the laterite plateaus of the Western Ghats and not anywhere else. And of course, the horseshoe pit viper is found only in the Nilgiri mastiff, in the high areas of the Nilgiris. So this is a good example of habitat specificity. This is a good example of a species which occurs only in a particular part of the Western Ghats because of separation from other ranges. And this is a very good example of a widespread species. This is not the only species that show this. There are every species in the Western Ghats falls under these three categories, but these are just some of the common examples. So like I mentioned earlier, we are going to go from the leeward slopes, that is the drier parts of the Western Ghats, climb to the mountain sholas, and then come down to the wetter slopes. So when we start with the drier scrub habitats in the leeward foothills, the most interesting reptile here for me is the Indian star tortoise, the Geochilon elegans. So this uh, uh, tortoise is actually found in a much wider part of southern India, in the Deccan Plateau and other parts where scrub forests are found. But there are small pockets like Chinnar Wildlife Sanctuary and parts of the Nilgiris where the star tortoise occurs in good numbers, even within what we consider Western Ghats. And these are the only areas where the star tortoise is found in the Western Ghats. And once you move further into the Western Ghats, they don't they do not occur there anymore. And these leeward scrub jungles, which are mostly bush and a lot of acacia and a lot of deciduous trees, they support a very good number of reptiles, some of which, again, like the star tortoise, are not found further into the wetter forests of the Western Ghats. So it's very important to know these reptiles because they occur only in this sliver of low rainfall area. And when you go further into the moisture parts, you generally don't see these reptiles again. So examples of these, probably the most important example of this would be the Indian chameleon, which is the only species of chameleon in South Asia. And this chameleon is found in scrub jungles, like I mentioned earlier, Mudumalai, parts of Nilgiris, Chinnar Wildlife Sanctuary, and other. It's actually quite widespread in these leeward slopes of the Western Ghats. But being a chameleon, they blend in so well into the bushes that they can be very, very hard to find. And they also have a very long tongue, which is folded into their mouth, and they use that to they throw it out to catch insects amongst the scrub they thrive in. So, like the Indian chameleon, you have the common green forest calotus, which is Calotus calotus. In fact, calotus as a group is a very good indicator of where you are in the Western Ghats. So, if you are in the leeward slopes, you'll be looking for this one. If you go in the higher anomalies, you'll be looking for Calotus grandisquamis, which is the large-scale forest calotus. If you are in Wayanad and Coorg, you'll be looking for the Nilgiri forest calotus. And if you are in Agastya Malai, you'll be looking for the orange lip lizard, which is also a kind of calotus. So there is the calotus is actually a very good indication of where you are in the Western Ghats. We'll be actually seeing the large scale forest calotus later when we talk about higher altitude habitats. Geckos. So these are probably one of the most complicated reptile groups, simply because they are very hard to separate in the field. You need to know a lot about the taxonomy of geckos, the anatomy, the scalation. You need to know a lot before you identify geckos. But I've put three images here to bring to you the three different prominent genus of geckos that you find in the Western Ghats. And interestingly, all these three are found in the leeward slope. So it's a very good example to compare. So firstly is the graceful day gecko, or Nemaspis graceless. The genus is called Nemaspis. And what is distinct about this group, which you can immediately identify, is the round eye. So basically, if you look at their eye, it's round as compared to the other genus, which have slit eyes. So it's like a line over here. Whereas in the Nemaspis group, which has around 34 species, if I'm not mistaken, in the Western Ghats, they have a round eye. As compared to that, a Hemidactylus, which is your well-known house geckos, uh, this bark gecko is one of the Hemidactylus group. They'll have a slit eye. A rarer and lesser known gecko from the region is the Hemiphilodactylus, and they're also called slender geckos or worm geckos. So the interesting thing about this gecko is that it actually has bright undersides to the tail, which it uses which moves it around like a worm to attract prey. So Hemiphilodactylus, apart from this difference, it is generally slender, smaller. It's like a very small ground gecko, unlike Hemidactylus, which is usually found on trees and walls. And overall, this gecko is slender and smaller. So the difference is, like I told you, you need to know a little bit more about scalation, the underside of the fingers, the pores that they have on the underside of the body. So those are actually the characters to identify species of geckos. But within the scope of this session that we are doing, you can say the round pupil, the overall structure, and the slit eye can be a good indication for the three different genus of geckos that we found here. In fact, recently the Hemidactylus group was split into another subgenus called Dravido gecko, which is found in the high Western Ghats, which we'll talk about later. Snakes, always my favorite. Snakes in the leeward foothills of the Western Ghats actually form a very interesting composition because they have elements from the plains, from the Deccan Plateau, and also they have some influences of species from the mid altitude slopes of the Western Ghats. But amongst all of them, these two are definitely my favorite, especially as a pair, because the one on the right is a venomous bamboo pit viper, which is found all along the forested habitats of the Deccan, parts of central India. And it is originally described from Vishakhapatnam, but this species is actually quite widespread. And in the Western Ghats, it's been recorded in Mudumalai, Chinnar Wildlife Sanctuary, and certain other pockets of the Western Ghats. In fact, quite well recorded in the northern Western Ghats in Matheran and all those areas. But interestingly, wherever the bamboo pit viper is found, a very similar looking non-venomous green and yellow cat snake is found. So if you actually look at the two of them, it's the photo makes it quite easy to see the differences. But in the field, the cat snake also has a very short snouted head. So people can often get confused between the two. In fact, the cat snake mimics the bamboo pit viper. So these two put together are found in this leeward habitats, and it's a very good example of how a non-venomous snake mimics a venomous snake to protect itself. In fact, even for a long time, people thought whenever they saw these snakes, they thought it was a bamboo pit viper. But only later did scientists realize that they were looking at something totally different. So now we are moving to the mid-altitude moist broadleaf forests. And here you need to know that the top character in this forest throughout the Western Ghats is the Malabar pit viper. And you can, if you look at this page, it looks like there are multiple species here, but you need to know that all of these are just different color morphs of the Malabar pit viper. In fact, there are many more color morphs of the Malabar pit viper. And these are actually very, very small snakes. They can probably be from somewhere like 10 to 15 centimeters. And they are generally found along streams at the bases of bushes, sometimes even on the barks of trees or a little higher up. And they are quite widespread throughout the Western Ghats. In fact, they are the most charismatic and most omnipresent snake in the Western Ghats. Whether you go to the northern Western Ghats or the southern tip or anywhere, you will be seeing Malabar pit vipers. In fact, I'd like to just mention here that pit vipers, we already saw the bamboo pit viper, the horseshoe pit viper, all of them get their name because of the heat sensing pits that they have at the tip of their snout. And that is a very distinct feature of the pit viper. And in fact, if you have a close look at the head, you can actually see the heat sensing pits next to the nostril. So that is a very key character of the pit viper group, which is found all over Southeast Asia, but the few species found in the Western Ghats also showed quite distinctly. So this mid-altitude moist broadleaf forest habitat of the Western Ghats is actually a very arboreal area. So it has a lot of tall trees. It's not very scrubby like the foothills. So a lot of the arboreal species of reptiles are found here. Like for example, there are many species of cat snakes. You can see why they call cat snakes. This very large eye that they have and a short snout makes it look like a cat's face. Vine snakes, which or whip snakes as they used to be called, because of their green color, they usually blend in very well on low trees and bushes. And of course, you have the ornate flying snake, which actually has the ability to flatten its body and glide amongst treetops. So all of these species actually use the low bushes and trees as their territories to hunt. And there are other species of reptiles and birds, and even sometimes bats that they pick off from these arboreal hunting grounds. In fact, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the wine snake. So, the wine snake is probably one of the most versatile hunters I've come across. One of the key feature of this snake is the fact that it has a horizontal slit eye, as compared to other snakes, which either have a vertical slit eye or a round eye. So, the round eye is generally you see it in rat snakes and cobras, king cobras, whereas I go back to an earlier slide, you can see that nocturnal snakes have a vertically slit eye, and a diurnal ornate flying snake will have a round eye. And and this vine snake, I'm not sure the reason why, but it has a horizontal eye. And they are generally seen eating a whole variety of prey. I mean, I've seen them eat birds. There are people who've seen them eating other species of ground dwelling snakes. So they actually hang from the edges of bushes facing the ground, and they're able to catch prey which is actually even moving on the ground. Like, for example, even the skink, this vine snake must have caught it from the ground from a low bush. So recently, the vine snakes of the Western Ghats were split into 6 to 7 different species based on morphology and also geological distribution. So features like the Palghat Gap, Shengota Gap, Goa Gap featured very heavily in splitting these vine snakes. But amongst all those splits, one interesting vine snake that you need to know about is the Sayadri vine snake or the brown vine snake, which is best told, of course, by the color, but normal vine snakes also can be brown. So the key feature to look out for is the leaf-like projection on the nose. So it's called a brown nose leaf. So that it's a very, very long snake, the brown vine snake, and it is found in this low scrub and mid-altitude areas of the Western Ghats and is best told by the nose leaf. So when you have so many arboreal snakes, you're going to have a lot of other arboreal lizards and other reptiles. So the Ruxus forest lizard is a very commonly seen arboreal lizard of Western Ghats. You also have the Elliott's forest lizard, which looks very similar, very subtle uh, differences between them. But I'd like to take a little time to explain about the Draco, which is the South Indian flying lizard. And this is one of the most fascinating reptiles you can come across in the Western Ghats. And I'd like to say here that these split ups of altitudinal range are just indicative. The Draco can be found in the foothill scrub areas also. It can be found further up also and on the other sides of the Western Ghats. But it is also more commonly found in this belt, and that's why I'm including it here. So the Draco is one such animal which can blend in so beautifully to the bark of a tree. So you can see that the top pattern of the Draco is entirely brown, and only on the underside, when it expands the neck flap to display or have a territorial flash for a rival male, that is the only time you see colors uh, in this flying lizard. It's this, we commonly call it Draco, but the technical name is South Indian flying lizard. That's what the common name of the animal is. And the coloration helps it blend so well into the bark of the tree, which is where it's usually found, especially in plantations where people can grow areca nut and coconut. You can see a lot of dracos there. And if you see them from the side, that's when you'll see the colorful throat and the neck flap that's expanded and contracted regularly. But this picture tells you why the Draco gets its name. It actually has flaps attached to the forearm and the body. And when it jumps, it just spreads it out. And I've actually seen them glide sometimes 10 to 15 meters, even 20 meters has been recorded between trees. So they're able to glide between trees from one bark of a tree to another. And that is one of the most unique features. It's probably one of the most unique reptiles found in the Western Ghats. There are other species of Draco found in other parts of the world. Even the northeast of India has a species, but this Draco dusumeri is endemic to the Western Ghats. So in this belt, you also have a lot of ground-dwelling terrestrial snakes. The aquatic forest snake is a very common sight along forest streams at night, especially in the northern Western Ghats. In the southern Western Ghats, you have a similar species called olive forest snake. And I'm uh, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this snake. It's called a trinket snake, but in the Western Ghats, it takes a different color. So these white bands and these checkered black and white bands do not exist in the species found in the plains. So this is actually a subspecies called montane trinket snake, which is found in the Western Ghats and some other forest patches even in the plains. So subspecies is a very interesting concept to bring out here because there's so much of work being done in the Western Ghats now, especially with DNA playing a big part, that vine snakes and trinket snakes are all still waiting uh, scientific attention to become elevated into species, or there could be a lot more happening here that we don't know. But for now, this is a subspecies of the common vine snake. And of course, you have many species of wolf snakes in the Western Ghats and kukris also. Kukri snakes, we have about 8 species of kukri snakes in different parts of the Western Ghats. And the best way to tell a kukri snake is the pattern on the head, which is it is shared amongst all species in different ways. And this is the Western kukri, which is actually quite widespread in the southern Western Ghats. And one of the best ways to tell this snake is the flying bird like marking. I mean, I try to remember markings of different things using other references which may not be conventional. So this is looks like a flying bird to me, with the head on one side and the wings and the tail. So it looks like a flying bird is there on top of the head. So that's a Western kukri, Oligodon affinis for me. So if we had a brief glimpse of the mid-altitude, high canopy forests, but once you hit the high altitude areas of Western Ghats, the windy peaks, here you have mostly grassland and stunted shola forests. So 90% of the species of reptiles here are terrestrial. That means they live on the ground or they live underground to protect from the cold elements. So ground or underground, very different to the mid-altitude areas. So two of the species that I'd like to first mention here is the large-scale pit viper, which is found south of the Palghat Gap only, and the horseshoe pit viper, which is found north of the Palghat Gap in the Nilgiris. So both of these are the two pit viper species found in the sholas and the grasslands of Western Ghats in these respective areas. In fact, the species here are so terrestrial that even the vine snakes that are generally known to be arboreal species there is one such species of vine snake in these grasslands that has adapted to a ground lifestyle. So it actually moves on the ground and sometimes climbs a low bush to seek refuge or to bask in the sun. But usually, the Ahetola parotiti or the parotetes or bronze-headed vine snake is one of the few terrestrial vine snakes found in the high Western Ghats. So this is the spiny lizard. This is the Nilgiri spiny lizard, and south of the Palghat Gap, you have the Anamalai spiny lizard. So this you can actually see in this picture that this is built like an arboreal lizard, but it at the maximum it climbs is a low rhododendron bush or one of these rocks, and otherwise it's a ground-dwelling lizard. So this is actually the main prey, apart from some of the Nemascus geckos, for the vine snake we just saw, or the horseshoe pit viper, or the large-scale pit viper, because all of them actually share a common space in the ground here, and there is very little climbing to be done in this habitat. In fact, you can actually see the entire habitat and how stunted the trees and bushes are, and it's pretty much all grasslands and stunted forests. So when we are talking about the high altitude habitats of the Western Ghats, there's one snake or one group of snakes that all of you need to know about. These are called shield tails. So shield tails is a group that is found only in the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, and they're not found anywhere else. At least southern India and Sri Lanka, I'll put it that way, because now people are finding shield tails even in Eastern Ghats and parts of the Deccan and even central India. So definitely, most of the shield tails are found only in the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. So shield tail is a one of the snakes which I mentioned earlier, which is lives underground. It's a fossorial snake, and it has very smooth, glossy skin, so that it can move underground very easily. And one of the distinct features of the shield tail is that it has very bright colors on the underside. Most species have bright colors on the underside. In fact, I'll go to the next slide to show you this better. So they have bright colors on the underside. So this is the above and this is below. So this is a Pteroturus or a red-bellied shield tail. And they also have very brightly patterned tails, which can be different shapes in different species. So this is a flat cut tail. This is a one of those tails which is round like the head, but it also has a pokey thorn at the tip. And this one has a blunt tail. So different genus of shield tails have different shaped tails, but one thing is for sure that all their tails have a bright coloration. And there have been many theories on why they have these bright tails. Some of it is says that they try to make the tail look like the head so that the predator will go for the tail and leave out the head. Well, some people say it helps in digging. Some people say the colors in the tail act like warning to predators. So there's many theories as to why they have such bright tails. But it is great that they have bright tails because it makes them look so beautiful. And we have about 52 recorded species of shield tails in the Western Ghats alone. But till now, because of their fossorial lifestyle, and a lot of the scientific papers describe places that don't exist anymore or the habitat is lost, so people don't know where those snakes are. So we right now we have documented 38 species of shield tails in the Western Ghats which have been found. There are a few more which are waiting to be found, I'll put it that way. They are there, but we just haven't found them yet, or we are seeing them but we don't know that this is what that is. So there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of scale counting, there's a lot of DNA. You need to know exactly the exact anatomy of scales of every single snake to be able to pick a species and identify it. Something like this could be easy, but a lot of the shield tails look similar, so you have to be very careful when you identify them. So suggestions from an expert would be highly recommended in identifying some species of shield tails that you haven't seen before. Another interesting thing we recently learned about shield tails was that they mimic venomous snakes. I mean, not many people know this, but this is a beautiful, very rare picture of a three-line shield tail, Platyplectorus trilineatus, taken by Lily Margaret. And this snake mimics a striped coral snake. In fact, in a very, very distinct way. In fact, if you look at this snake first, you think it's a coral snake, and you don't even consider it to be a shield tail, because shield tails are these small snakes with blunt tails and one of those narrow heads. But this one is a shield tail, but it looks very much like a coral snake. In fact, people are now finding other species of shield tails or different color morphs of shield tails that mimic other species of coral snakes. So there is one in Wayanad which mimics the biberon's coral snake, which has the same bands on the underside. So it's a lot of new learnings about the colors of these shield tails. Why does a snake that lives underground need to be so brightly colored? There are multiple answers for this, and people are still trying to get the right answer. But for now, it still remains a big mystery. So when you have all these terrestrial ground-dwelling reptiles, snakes in the high Western Ghats, you're also going to have other ground-dwelling reptiles like beautiful cat skinks. You have the Calotus grandisquamis, or the large-scale forest calotus, which we spoke about earlier. You have ground skinks, and you also have some very beautiful high-altitude endemic nemaspus. This is actually one of the largest nemaspus species recorded. This is the Nemaspus maculacollis, which is found in Elival Malay in Silent Valley, one of the highest peaks. It's found in a few boulders over there. But apart from that, this is a very interesting group of skinks called Ristella, which means cat skinks. Basically, they have retractable claws like cats, and that's a very distinct feature of this skink that is not found in other reptiles. And that also gives an understanding of why they are called cat skinks. Now, when we move towards the western moist slopes where the rains hit the hardest, you have the wetter forests. And these forests mainly have a lot of water. And one thing that they have along with water is a lot of leaf litter. That is the leaves that collect in the river valleys and in the forest floor, because the forest has so much leaves. There's constantly new leaves growing, that there's a lot of leaf litter on the ground. And this leaf litter is actually one of the best places to look for the species that are found in this part of the Western Ghats. Two of them which come to my mind first, of course, is the hump-nosed pit viper. They are the masters of camouflage. They just sit amongst the leaf litter, and their short snout just pokes out. And in the night, they come out into the open. So generally, we say walk carefully with boots when you're walking in these parts of the Western Ghats, because it's, even for the trained eye, it can be very difficult to spot a hump-nosed pit viper. In fact, one of the best ways to tell the hump-nosed pit viper from the earlier seen Malabar pit viper is that the hump-nosed pit viper, apart from the pointed snout, they also have very large scales on the top of the head, whereas the Malabar pit viper has very tiny, small scales on top of the head. So in case you're confused as to which pit viper you're looking at, you can be sure that you're looking at one of them if you see the scales on top of the head. Another interesting endemic reptile is the Autocryptis bedomi, or the kangaroo lizard. It's very obvious why it gets the kangaroo name, because of its long hind legs. And this is also a species that uses the leaf litter and the low bushes to move amongst this part of the Western Ghats. In fact, the other species of Autocryptis are found only in Sri Lanka, and in India we have only this one, Autocryptis bedomi. And again, because of the leaf litter, it can hide so many species so well. You have different skinks. You even have a lacerta, which is basically an Ophisops. So lacertas is a group of lizards which are mainly found in desert habitats. But interestingly, the Bedom's lacerta is found in the Western Ghats in some areas. In fact, it's found in these moist leaf litter conditions along streams and rocky areas. So otherwise, we don't have the Ophisops genus, the Lacerta genus in the Western Ghats. It's only this species. And this red-tailed skink, or Dusignus forest skink, is probably the most widespread skink in this habitat. In fact, when you're walking through leaf litter, you can pretty much be sure that any skink that runs away 90% of the time is a Sphenomorphus dusumeri or a red-tailed skink. And at the same time, you also have other species of kinks. This is found in Tattekad. It's called Inger's grass skink, or Eutropus clavicola, best told by the dark line on top of the body. But the Eutropis genus generally has multiple species. They can be hard to separate unless you know scalation. So you have Eutropis dawsoni and very similar looking skinks. But some of them can be told apart by distinctive external features like white stripes or lines. But mostly you'll have to know about the head scales of these species. So, like I mentioned earlier, the leaf litter supports not just humpnose pit vipers, it supports the whole range of geckos, skinks, and a lot of other prey species. So, automatically, there are going to be reptiles which are using the leaf litter uh, as cover, especially snakes, to move in a hidden manner through the undergrowth of the forest. And some of them I'd like to show here, which is the hill keelback, the biberon's coral snake, which is actually one of the most beautiful snakes in the Western Ghats, and of course the Wynard black shield tail or any other species of black shield tail, because all of them use the leaf litter. In fact, one of the best ways to see them in the monsoon is just to move the leaf litter as you go, and sometimes you see these beautiful shield tails hiding amongst it. Because the ground is so wet and moist, they can't afford to be underground anymore. There's too much water. So they use the leaf litter and the gap between stones to hide during the monsoon time. So even in this area, despite the perfect conditions for terrestrial life, that is the leaf litter on the ground, the lot of hiding spots, there are still many arboreal species here. The Prashad's gecko, of course, Hemidactylus prashadi, is found throughout the Western Ghats in this belt, in the wet forest belt. The large-eyed bronzeback tree snake is one of the 6 bronzeback tree snakes that are found in the Western Ghats in these areas, mainly in these wet forest areas. But one interesting story I'd like to mention here is Nemaspus littoralis, or the coastal day gecko. It's a very nondescript Nemaspus, which I like to remind you has a round eye, as I told you earlier. Nemaspus, other gecko species have a slit eye. So there's an interesting story about a beetle which affected the coconut plantations in Kerala and started making holes in these coconuts. This is about as early as the last 50 to 100 years. But this gecko has adapted to climbing into these holes and laying eggs, as you can see here. So this is probably one of the most recent adaptations to arboreal life shown by this Nemaspis, because most of the other Nemaspis species lay their eggs on the ground or in rocks. But this one has figured out that it can climb trees and find these holes which are dug by the beetles to lay its eggs. It is quite an incredible, in fact, a very quick adaptation as compared to most of the adaptations we study in evolution. And of course, coming back, we started out with the turtle, we started out with the tortoise. Uh, so the other end of the Western Ghats also has 2 endemic species of testudines, the Travancore tortoise, which is quite widespread in the Western Ghats, especially in the southern Western Ghats, and the rarer Cochin forest cane turtle. This is found amongst the canna reeds, the bamboo, and the dense leaf litter in the wet forest of the Western Ghats. And you can see why it can be very hard to find, because it has this algal covered shell that if they just retract and hide amongst the leaf litter, you're not going to find them. They're going to be very, very hard. And also, they move very minimally, except for a small time of the year when they are seeking a mate. Otherwise, they move very minimal, and or they just stay amongst the leaf litter or stay in one place, sometimes even for months together, as studies have shown. But it's a very beautiful turtle, a forest turtle. Unlike the other turtles which we normally know, which are flippers, these actually have claws. But they don't have these pillar like feet which tortoises have, but still it looks very different from a conventional turtle. It's actually one of the most fascinating reptiles of the Western Ghats, the Cochin forest cane turtle, because the colors also intensify on the head as the breeding season approaches for the male, and the dark colors become very distinct, and the green shell with the dark head, and they as they move through the undergrowth can be quite a sight to see. So we started out with the king cobra, and this is the habitat of the king cobra, the wet foothills and the mid slopes of the Western Ghats. And we know that it's the largest venomous snake. It is very popular in folklore. We know it is found in throughout the Western Ghats, very charismatic, larger than life. But what we need to know here is the Latin name Ophiophagus, Hannah. Ophiophagus literally means it eats other snakes. And another interesting fact about the king cobra is that is the only snake species in the world which builds a nest for its young. So the snake actually uses its body coils to wrap up large amounts of leaf litter and make a small mound. And the snake actually stays on top till the eggs hatch to protect the nest. And the beauty of this nest making is that it has no hands or legs. But every time you put a condition or a temperature measuring device or a humidity measuring device into the nest, you can be sure that the constant temperature and humidity is a guarantee. So across all nests, these studies were done, and they realized that all these nests, despite the rainy Western Ghats conditions, despite the winds, the nest stays intact, and the inside of the nest has the same condition. And there's no leak of water. There is, because any change can damage the life of the eggs. So the nests are built carefully, and it's amazing that they build this perfect structure just using their coils and no hands and legs. It's one of the most fascinating reptile stories, and I'm yet to witness that, but I've seen videos, and it's quite something. So the last habitat type, which moving away from the east to west direction, is the laterite plateaus that are interspersed amongst the Western Ghats. So there are many laterite plateaus in the Western Ghats that is basically flat-topped green hills with very little soil and a lot of exposed rock. And these habitats have been colonized by certain specific species. In fact, one of the top predators here is the saw-scale viper, especially in the northern Western Ghats, because these saw-scale vipers are usually found in dry, plain desert areas. But strangely, there's a population which is found in the Western Ghats only in these laterite plateaus. And of course, when you have ground-dwelling snakes like saw-scale vipers, you're going to have hemidactylus geckos, you're going to have beautiful skink species, and also this beautiful white-handed ground gecko or a Cyrtodactylus albofasciatus. Basically, that's a gecko which has white fingers, as you can see here, and it's found in the lateritic plateaus of Amboli, Agumbe, and all those areas. And this Puna skink is found in parts of the Western Ghats near Pune, especially in lateritic plateaus where they hide amongst rocks, or if sometimes you may lift a rock and you'll see them because the ground here is not conducive for digging usually. So even shield tails are very minimal in these lateritic plateaus. Uh, in fact, the shield tails here use leaf litter, unlike the other shield tails which dig more readily. These shield tails can find it tough to dig through on these hard ground conditions. So laterite plateaus is another habitat that is very key in the Western Ghats. In fact, the most popular laterite plateau is Khas Plateau in Mahabaleshwar near Pune, which is famous for its annual flowering events. But apart from that, there is a lot of interesting life cycles that play out here that people are still studying, and it's a very, very unique habitat type amongst the Western Ghats. So, how one went to go looking for reptiles in the Western Ghats? This is a question with not just one answer. So, generally, the first rains during the monsoons is the best time to go looking for snakes, but it is also the time when snakes are most active. Uh, a lot of the snakes, especially the fossorial ones like shield tails, which you don't see throughout the year, the first rains come, the ground becomes too soggy and wet, and the snakes come out and they start moving. And that is also one of the best times to see them. But unfortunately, this is also the time when people need to know that snakes are most vulnerable because they come out into areas they're not comfortable with. They get run over by cars. They're exposed to predators. So when you see a snake in these conditions, you still have to be sensitive. It's of course exciting, but you still have to be sensitive to the conditions that the snake is in. And this is also the breeding time for most snakes. So whenever you see a snake, it is important to treat it with respect. It is important to know that the snake needs to be left in the same place where it has been found in case there is some modifications or studies or data that needs to be taken. So all of these things are very important to keep in mind when you see snakes in the monsoon time. But definitely the first monsoon are the best time to look for snakes and other reptiles in the Western Ghats. So we often do these walks with people where we can take them out and you see a snake. There are a lot of misconceptions amongst people when it comes to snakes because they feel every snake is venomous. In fact, a shield tail feeds only on earthworms and eggs of termites. So a shield tail can't even bite you. But even I know people who are scared of shield tails also. So it is important that we have the power of knowledge. You have to know how to identify or what snake it is when you see it. Because when you know that, you become aware, you are more confident, and you also know that what is going to be dangerous and what is not, and accordingly you will be able to take the right decision in the field. So, for example, a lot of people kill rat snakes and wolf snakes thinking they are cobras and kraits without knowing that they are just good pest control in most of their lands. But they are often killed by people because they don't realize that this is a wrong identification in their part. So, a lot of these problems can be solved if there is good awareness, knowledge building, and also sensitization towards snakes, which unfortunately is happening. It is happening, but it's happening at a very slow pace. So snakes are still regularly being killed. And even snakes like shield tails or wolf snakes or trinket snakes, which are harmless, they are also being killed regularly in different parts of the country only because of this awareness issue. Of course, we spoke about how important habitat is to reptiles. So there are some reptiles, like I told you, which are found only in one peak or one slope or one habitat type within a slope. So when you have such important habitat niches, which an entire species depends on, then a scene like this can wipe out up sometimes even 10 to 15 species of reptiles to extinction. A dam can wipe out the habitat of an entire reptile species. So, for example, if you dam some parts of southern Western Ghats, you may lose one or two species of shield tails. You may lose one or two species of geckos or lizards because they are found only in that area. That is their habitat niche. The geology of the Western Ghats has made them evolve into that small pocket. And when that is lost by one single project or one single bad decision, we lose an entire species. So that is how important it is to know the reptiles and where they're found. Not just reptiles, any taxa of animal, bird, frog that you take. When you know how important that area is that area is for that frog or snake, then you know that a project like this can be hugely disastrous for multiple species. And there has been a lot of fragmentation and habitat loss. We especially spoke a lot about terrestrial snakes and grasslands. But a lot of the grasslands have come under plantations of tea and coffee. There have been a lot of plantations of eucalyptus and wattle in all our popular hill stations because there was a requirement for wood, there was a requirement for dry land, there was a requirement for tannin. So all of these things was has over the years caused serious habitat modification. So, in fact, if you go into a wattle or eucalyptus forest in our hill stations like Kodaikanal or Ooty or anywhere you go, you will see that you're not finding anything over there. But the moment you step out and go into a shola, you will see reptile species. So, that is how specific these reptiles are. Just because you put a different forest doesn't mean they can adapt to that. They will still need to have their native habitats to survive and thrive. And also, I mentioned this earlier, something as simple as roads, which make our lives easy. In the first monsoon, when the rains come, the snakes are out, they're crossing roads all the time. I've seen some roads in Mahabaleshwar and sometimes near Agumbe, where sometimes in the night you can see 20, 25 snakes dead on the road, run over by vehicles. And that is not a very good sight. Simple things when people know that snakes will be out during the first rains because that is their breeding time, the ground is too wet for them to bury themselves, so they come out. Simple things like that can make a difference in the life of a snake or life of many snakes, as I've witnessed in some parts of the country. So I believe strongly that knowledge means a lot. When you know what is right, what is wrong, when you know where to look for snakes, when you know what a snake is, or when you know what a lizard is, when you have the knowledge, you have the confidence to conserve and take the right decision. And sometimes it can even lead to great things. As we recently found one of the lost species of reptile, the golden shield tail. So this is a reptile which was earlier considered to be found only in a particular peak in Wayanad, but all our surveys over there, we never saw the snake, and even the scientists went there, they never saw the snake. But when we were able to when we were just surveying some other part of the Western Ghats, especially the Nilgiris, we saw the snake in a couple of areas. So that is how interesting it is. So we knew that this snake existed. So we knew that this was something interesting. And then we took some pictures and sent it to the scientists. And they confirmed that this is indeed Plecturus aureus. So there was possibly some mistake in the original data given by the scientist in the 18th century, where he probably recorded the location wrong. So there could be beautiful things hiding in plain sight even today. Like I told you, there's only 38 of the shield tails are known amongst the 52. So there is probably many more species which are waiting to be found. So a simple knowledge can not just save lives, not human lives, snake lives, it can also add to science. So knowing about these things is as important as knowing about the trees or anything else that is found in the forest. I hope this has been useful. It is a very, very vast topic. It is very hard to cover in a single talk. But I hope I've got you interested and curious about snakes and also given you a general broad outline of how the reptiles are found in different parts of the Western Ghats. And if I've done that, I think I've achieved my whatever I started out doing. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak about this.